Hello, bonjour et welcome and bienvenue au Centre de recherche en droit public de l'Université de Montréal. I warmly thank the High Commissioner of South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Shaik, for accepting our invitation. Dear Mo, thank you. We had the immense pleasure of receiving His Excellency in January 2024. After the financial crisis of 2008, the COVID crisis of 2020, the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and many other events, we are now facing an international trade crisis that threatens to undermine the normative architecture surrounding trade. During his last visit, the High Commissioner invoked the concept of polycrisis. The situation has not improved since then. In fact, it can be argued that the situation has degraded and that new crises have been added to the polycrisis of 2024. While the rise to power of Donald Trump certainly contributed to the emergence of new crises, it must also be acknowledged that the erratic, even chaotic position of the United States did not begin with the Trump presidency. Since the end of the Cold War, the United States has accumulated strategic mistakes, whether it be the war on terror, the invasion of Iraq, the quasi-capitulation from Afghanistan, the blind support for the Netanyahu government, the periodic questioning of international trade rules, the continuous provocation towards Russia, the persistent position of neoconservatives within the American establishment, despite their colossal errors, the lack of restraint of successive administration, the endless wars, etc. All of this contributes to a purely tactical American policy devoid of any strategic aim or historical perspective. Who can trust the word of the US today when they betray their promises and fake negotiation? And we know about that in Canada. The decline of the United States is a source of anxiety for them. It fuels their aggressive behavior. Multilateralism doesn't suit the US, which still believe it's in the unipolar era of the immediate post-war period. But that era is over. We must now accept the multipolar world, and one with multiple vectors as well, diplomatie multivectorielle in French. I will return to this last point. The G20, presided by South Africa this year, is a relevant forum that brings together nations with diverse destinies. The Global South can establish itself as a crucial forum in the management of world affairs. These countries must practice what Jorge, who used to be a minister in Chile, calls active non-alignment. He writes with Carlos Fortin and Carlos Ominami, active non-alignment is a foreign policy doctrine based on refusing to take side in the great power competition that is a feature of the international system today. Deployed by developing nations that find themselves pressured by the United States on the one hand and by China on the other, it puts the national interest of the country front and center. It examines each foreign policy issue on its merits, rejecting what it considers an artificial binary choice between Washington and Beijing. The grand strategy of active non-alignment is what has been called playing the field. That is, taking advantage of this competition among the great powers to maximize the development opportunities for Global South nations in a way that was not possible during the unipolar moment. We are coming back here to this diplomatie multivectorielle that I was referring to earlier. So the BRICS Plus fit into this perspective, even though Russia and China are not countries of the Global South in the strict sense. But as Jorge Heine says, active non-alignment is a geopolitical concept, not a purely geographical one. I could also tell you about IPSA, which brings together India, Brazil, and South Africa. IPSA is a unique forum which brings together 3 large democracies and major economies from 3 different continents facing similar challenges. These initiatives and concepts, BRIC Plus, the Global South, active non-alignment, etc., represent a way to escape this perpetual struggle between great powers and to give a voice to countries whose economic and political status is no longer that of Bandung in 1950. This nation must have a voice because they represent the future of the world today, and perhaps also the conscience of the world. A naive vision, our realist friends would tell me, but I cannot bring myself to give up on this hope. I'm very pleased to be able here at the Université de Montréal to receive the High Commissioner to share with us the geopolitical vision of South Africa, a country of the Global South, a member of BRIC Plus, and whose destiny continues to impress us. A short question period will follow his Excellency conference. It will be led by Thibaut Biscayi, a researcher at the Centre de Recherche en Droit Public. Dear Mo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Karim. I don't know whether... Thank you for the great participation here. I was here in January 2024, and it was such an exciting discussion. I'm hoping to build on the themes that I developed or presented the last time and take it a little bit deeper and a little bit more in-depth. Now, I also don't know whether you'll be tested or writing some kind of exam or essay or whatever, but if there's one book you should read, is that book that you have referred to by Jorge, and that's called Active Non-Alignment. It is the most compelling book written that explains the South and the evolution of the South to where we are now. I compel you to get that book and read it. It is a must-read. It is prescribed reading for all South African diplomats. We're all reading it. I have finished it, and much of the concepts that I'm presented here is based on that, together with a few other things. So now I will try this. So the title here is Whither Multilateralism in the Age of Loss. And it took me a long while to capture this title, because in a sense, whether multilateralism mean where does multilateralism go to? And the age of loss is what we are generally feeling at individual, societal, collective level. And the French have a great word for it called ennui. I hope I pronounce it ennui or ennui. The sense of weariness, the sense that we have lost something, we don't quite know what it is, but it is a sense of loss. Have we lost multilateralism? Have we lost our way? Where are we in the technological evolution of our societies? And how do we locate ourselves in it? So I've titled this thing, Whither Multilateralism in the Age of Loss. So I am always searching for a narrative by which I can explain events that happens in life. And I think as human beings, that's what we normally do. We search for narratives, a kind of structure by which we can explain things to ourselves. And I accept that we may also live in an era where narratives is also part of the age of loss, where certainty is also a phenomenon that is lost in this world. I mean, let's just take, for example, last week or the week before, President Trump was hell-bent on putting or engaging in a trade war with China. And that was last week's world. Today's world is that he may have now reached an agreement with China about a whole range of things. And of course, all those countries who base their posture on what the US was going to do now have to change their posture about what do they do about China. And of course, that puts us to the very important question of what does Canada do in regard to China. So just to give you an example of this uncertain world, an unpredictable world we live in, we all know about the advert that was taken out by Premier Ford during the baseball, and I must also confess, I have been recruited as a baseball fan, and I'm watching the baseball between the Blue Jays and the LA Dodgers. And in that show, there was the ad that was taken by Premier Doug Ford, which brought on another 10% tariffs. So 2 weeks ago, we were all watching baseball. During the baseball, an advert takes place. The next thing we have is a 10% tariff and a whole lot of discussions about that. But that is the nature of the world we are living in. I don't want to talk about Israel unless, of course, I'll be accused of a whole lot of things, but I'm sure I will come to that in a moment. So here is my schematic of the presentation. It deals with what I'm calling the planetary problematic, and I'll tell you where I got that from. The polycrisis, to build on the polycrisis, then to look at the factors that influence international cooperation. And there are two principal things that influence international cooperation: the decline of the West, the rise of the rest, or the rise of the majority, or the rise of the South. And then we have certain challenges, and the challenges that affect international cooperation, I put them down as rule-based international order, the famous RBIO. The second would be the weaponization of interdependence. That is also a key feature of our lives today, the weaponization of interdependence. And then, of course, the area of impunity. I said I was not going to speak about Israel, but when I put that up, the area of impunity, something immediately comes to my mind about the impunity that we see of Israel, the impunity of other countries, including Russia, and I will speak about that. And then we're going to look at the way forward and the G20 in the way forward. Are we all good with this? Let's proceed. I will try not to be, did I miss something? I think I missed something. Did I? No. Okay. So the global polycrisis, as we know, economic instability, which is something we all now understand is a feature of our lives, inflation, supply chain fragility, rising debt burden strain both developed and emerging economies, creating systemic financial vulnerabilities. There's not a day go by, you got the November 4th budget that's going to come out in Canada. There's a huge debate about whether you spend 5% of your GDP on weapons, on the militarization, on the protection of the Arctic. Well, someone's going to pay for that 5% GDP spending that NATO requires. Canada is a member of NATO. Where does that money come from? Does it add to the budget deficit? How do you manage development versus budget deficit? And if that is happening to Canada, it's happening across the board to all countries in the G7, in the G20, in the developing countries. And there is a principal rise of debt that we need to be able to deal with in the world before there's a collapse. Climate emergency, accelerating climate change manifest in extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, resource scarcity, amplifying humanitarian crisis. Well, two very quick examples should come in mind. In the summer, you have wildfires that are ravaging Canada, other parts of the world, including South Africa, Europe, etc. And then yesterday we had Hurricane Melissa ravaging the Caribbeans. And this now is also a feature of the world you live in. We may not be too long in the world, Karim, but you will probability be much longer in the world than I would be. And this is the reality that you're going to have to confront. How do you deal with climate emergencies? Thirdly, geopolitical tensions, escalating conflict, shifting alliances, weaponization of trade and technology, challenge global governance and stability. On the point of technology, fantastic book by the Acemoglu and Robertson. Their second book, the first book, as we know, Why Nations Fail. The second book, Power and Progress, makes a very important point about technology. It seems, if I could quote them, I'm halfway through the book, that technology, when looked at through 1,000 years of human history, is a distributor. is a distributor of who gains and who loses. And invariably, it is the elites who gain and the rest who lose. So while we welcome technology, we must understand that it distributes inequality across the world as well. And I make that point in regard to AI. NVIDIA, a chip-making company, crossed, let me get the figures right, $5 trillion in value yesterday. $5 trillion in value yesterday. That is a massive amount of wealth or stock in one company in the world. And that's the kind of divide we are going to start experiencing. And that is what technology is also driving. And I'm sure you've heard of the word Luddite. It comes from Nell Luddite. And always when I grew up, the analysis of being a Luddite was someone who was anti-technology. Well, not quite true. Not quite true. So do read up about Luddites and whether Luddites are truly anti-technology or they're anti-inequality. And there is a difference. So I am anti-inequality and see technology in that prism also, whether it is a contributor to inequality or the shared distribution of technological gains or wealth in society. Pandemics and public health, COVID-19 exposed the weaknesses in our health systems and the risk of new outbreaks underscore the fragile balance of global resilience. I want to make one very simple point there. Recently, I completed a tour of the north of Canada. And when I talk about the north of Canada, I'm now a member of the Arctic exploration. I crossed the Arctic Circle, went further to a point called Resolute Bay, and I was taken with a group of other ambassadors by Global Affairs, a very fantastic journey to see the effects of climate change. Well, there was something that struck me about that trip. And one of the scientists tells us that for thousands of years, bacteria that is frozen because of the ice was remained under the ice. But now that that ice is melting, these zombie bacteria, and they have to start preparing for what happens when these zombie bacteria start to come back to life because of climate change. And as human beings, we have no immunity to such things. So when we're thinking about climate change, also think about what is going to happen when ancient bacteria or ancient viruses that we have no understanding about come alive and start to create havoc in our societies. Lastly, social fragmentation, growing inequality, misinformation, polarization erode trust in institutions, fueling populism and undermining collective action. And I think all of us can see how social fragmentation is gripping so many different countries at the moment. You look in countries in Asia, how quickly the people are now taking to the streets. It is spreading through Africa. And today I was reading an analysis that says this may even happen in South Africa. Because we can no longer contain the social fragmentation based on decades of inequality and deprivation. So just to continue, we'll wait for them to get that going. But essentially, there are three problematics in society. The first is the sociological problematic, and this deals with, and you'll see it when it comes up. Should I wait or just keep going? Can I continue? The sociological problematic is the one that deals with the crisis of capitalism. And I, for one, do believe there is a crisis in capitalism. But what is going to emerge from this crisis of capitalism? we have different forms of capitalism practiced by different countries differently. We have a form of state capitalism in China, and it is said that this state capitalism gives the Chinese firms and companies an unfair advantage. It's a form of subsidization. But state capitalism seems to be now spreading. So the United States of America, as a government, are now buying shares in strategic companies. They're buying shares in critical mineral companies, both here in Canada and abroad. So that too is a version of state capitalism that is emerging. But within capitalism, there is a struggle taking place between fossil fuel capitalism and green capitalism. Because yes, we all believe in renewable energies, but renewable energies also is a form of capitalism based in terms of who is supplying the solar, how is the energy being priced, etc. And fossil fuel capitalism, and I think the fossil fuel capitalists are in fact winning that war. They're winning the war, and no better in any other slogan called drill, baby, drill. Drill, baby, drill means fossil fuel capitalism has been favored over other forms of capitalism. Now, but within that, there's another capitalism that's emerging, and this is where the leftists talk about the new feudal, techno-feudalism. And in techno-feudalism, what we really do have is cloud capitalism. Now, if you look at cloud capitalism, if you take all the big internet or all the companies related to the cloud, you will see how they are moving exponentially into the wealth beyond stratosphere. So think NVIDIA, 5 trillion, think Amazon, think Apple, think how all of those internet-based or cloud-based capitalists are truly moving into another stratosphere. And the question is, who controls that wealth? What happens to that wealth, etc. So there's a very interesting study. Normally in any company, the wage bill will be about 40% of your revenue. Your revenue, 40% of your revenue is the wage bill. It is said that Amazon wage bill is about 4% of its revenue. Now, when you are looking at distortions of that level, and then recently I've heard that Amazon may be laying off 14,000 corporate employees in order to concentrate on AI and automation, etc. So the distribution, economics as we once knew it, has fundamentally changed. I am an alumni of the Business School Advanced Management Program of Harvard. I would love to go back to see what are the case studies now and how are they putting this together in case studies to understand where economics is going and what are the basic methodology of economics and how do we understand how to make sense of this capitalist world that is emerging. But whether it is fossil fuel or green capitalism or AI, because AI is massively thirsty. It needs tremendous amount of energy and it needs tremendous amount of water. And those two things will put crises on the earth. We already have an earth systems crisis, as we predicted, as we mentioned in the Polycrisis. And these new forms is going to increase that stress of fault lines, and we need to know how it will be managed. So maybe Canada is a country blessed with water, but for the first time I heard something more like a drought in Canada. In certain parts of Canada, there's drought occurring, and that's having an effect on food production. So even if you think that the solution is to build massive data centers and locate these data centers, then where would you locate them if not in water? Because you're going to need water to cool things down, and you're going to need water, and you're going to need a high amount of energy to run these centers. So those things also present their own challenges. Of course, disease and pandemic, and then we have the food crisis, we have the energy crisis. So the sociological problematic is one. The second, it involves the violence problematic. It's something that we need to describe in our societies. What is the level of violence, and how does the state deal with violence? So think here how surveillance and police power is now becoming a new thing. Increasingly, the use of facial images to identify people, records, criminalities. The two of you may be quite surveilled. He looks a little bit Arab to me, could possibly be a problem. My brother here may be an illegal immigrant, so he may be a problem. And that's the way, and or definitely you, sir. So you are going to be profiled, and this profiling is going to be an increasing part of surveillance of the state. But the violence in our society is also related to gangs, right? So when Haiti is presented as a problem of a country that is run by gangs, you need to understand what is going on here, right? And then if you look at Brazil, that happened 2 days ago, the largest operation in one of the favelas, in respect of 64 people getting killed, 4 police officers, 60 other people, a massive operation against the organized gangs of the favelas. So the notion of gangs, in my country, we are having commissions at the moment in which there is organized crime seem to have captured the police force. The police force, the very people responsible for the execution of the law, are now subject to a massive commission and parliamentary commission about how they have captured organs of the police. So this is a real phenomenon, and a real phenomenon that is discussed, and when you're dealing with it, the only way to deal with it, according to some states, is through more violence. So the violence problematic is an emerging problematic in all our societies. And the third one it affects is the existential problematic. All of these three things constantly forces us to say, who are we? What is our ideology? Where do we belong? How do we define ourselves? Do we belong to races? Do we belong to certain genders? What is the nationalism that emerges in our societies and countries? And it produces swings. The good news in Holland today, the party D66 won over the right-wing party, which of Gert Wilders, the right-wing, they dropped. So it seemed like a moderate government will now emerge, if they can form a government, in the Netherlands. And there is a debate in Germany about whether to ban the right-wing party, the AfD, in Germany, because they believe it is a Nazi propagating party, extreme racism, and it is in violation of the constitution. So an intelligence service in Germany ruled that a political party is in violation of the German constitution, and that political party has votes in parliament. So this is the weird world in which we are living in. So you would have seen this slide last year. It tells you how everything is connected in the Polycrisis. It is by Homer Dixon from the Cascade Institute. Again, I would refer you to polycrisis.org. Read the papers are there. They are fantastic papers to give you a deeper understanding of the Polycrisis. But the important thing of this, and the reason why I brought it out, Karim, I presented this in 2022. Was it 24, 22, 24? And it was based on a paper that they demonstrated at 22. Is this the marker, right? So you see that is situation in 22, but now in 25, right? And if you just go down the line, what they predicted in 2022, go down the line, and you'll see securocratic nationalist government, economic and political deglobalization, higher risk of interstate war, collapse of the global climate regime. So in 2022, the things that they predicted are indeed happening. And that is where we are. And I thought it is so important to show you this, that in this systems analysis of things, they could make certain predictions which are now, just 3 years ago, are already starting to happen. And of course, it's based on this understanding of intersystemic cascade of wars and how you have positive and negative loops. I just want to take a minute here to say, let's take military spending. The more there is war, the more you will have military spending, and that's why you have a plus. But the more you spend on military, the less you will spend on climate action. And if the less you spend on climate action, it will have a negative effect on food prices. In other words, food prices will go up. And if food prices go up, it's going to increase stagflation. And if you increase stagflation, you're going to increase political extremism, because that is the way the world works. So this system of understanding how one particular phenomenon affects either in a positive or negative way, and positive is not good and negative is not bad, so don't use positive, negative in that sense, affecting increase or decrease. And if you see in international cooperation, if you have higher levels of international cooperation, you will be able to address climate action. The converse is also true. The lower levels of international cooperation, you will have less climate action, right? And the greater there is political polarization and paralysis, it affects in a negative way international, the less international cooperation you would have. So I think we are leaving this behind. So if you want to use this as a scheme to understand how things affect one way or the other, because it's a systemic approach to understanding politics in the world. So my view is that international cooperation is affected fundamentally by two types of cycles. A virtuous cycle that reinforces cooperation, build trust, build strong institutions, and a vicious cycle that erodes cooperation and produces part dependency. And it is the interaction of these two cycles that affects the status and the outcome. Now, these two concepts is borrowed from Why Nations Fail, from Acemoglu and Robertson in their book of 2012, Why Nations Fail. They introduced the notion of vicious and virtuous cycle as applied to political governance. And I'm trying to use it here in defining how it affects international cooperation. So one other thing I'm really interested, you may have seen a version of this in my earlier presentation, but I'm trying to use my science, the little that I have, in politics to see whether we can apply certain scientific concepts to politics. So in the bottom where you have entropy. So entropy is the pull towards chaos. Negentropy is the action you take to reverse that chaos. So we are a product of our entropy and negentropy. If something is pulling you to chaos, what are you doing to pull in the other direction? And that produces a particular state. And you could say whether you are more entropy or more we're pulling back on negentropy. And you can think about it in terms of your own lives, whether you're letting your natural pull to chaos take you in a particular direction or you're pulling in the other direction. I tried to introduce this concept to my son. Yeah, I didn't have much joy in that, but I tried in any case. And then, of course, on the y-axis, I have states of organization: vulnerable, resilient, and anti-fragile. And of course, I'm borrowing the words of Talib Nassim here on anti-fragility. About anti-fragility is more than just a state of resilience. It's more than just a state of being able to absorb vulnerability or stress. It is actually getting stronger as a result of that stress. Yeah? And then I said, okay, what are the different states that we could exist? We could have unfavorable order, and you could have favorable order. And to think about unfavorable order, that there is order, but someone gets favor from that order. And I'll show you an example of that. Favorable order is when everyone is getting a particular outcome, which they could all be happy and live with. And it is, of course, when organizations are resilient. And if you take that further up, if you keep the entropy low and you increase the anti-fragility of organizations or societies, then you start to move into notions of utopia. That's the best way you want to live, right? You're keeping your fault lines low and you're increasing your ability to grow, and that's when you're becoming anti-fragile, and that's a form of utopia that we will all desire. And of course, when your entropy starts to increase, you are moving towards disorder. And you could have favorable disorder, where disorder is favorable. It is favorable for some, but it's a disorder for others, right? So it's favorable disorder. And then if you come down, you have unfavorable disorder, where everyone is at risk, and there are no winners in favorable disorder. And of course, if the entropy continues to exist, you're then in what we call a catastrophic world. So I'm using this model to explain the West and the rest. There we go. So when you look at this, you'll see that from World War II, over a period of 80 years, the Western world moved through unfavorable order, because the immediate aftermath of World War II was unfavorable order. It went through a process of integration, the building of the United Nations, the building of competition with the Soviet Union, but still there was a level of integration. And then we had the Nixon shock, which was the 37th president. And the Nixon shock, as we all know, that he unlocked the gold from the dollar and changed and made the dollar free floating, and the dollar became the dominant thing, and boom. From the Nixon shock, the next thing that happened was 9/11 and the beginning of war on terror. And since then, there's been a disintegration into unfavorable disorder. So I agree with Karim that Trump was not a product of the disintegration of the Western liberal order. He is certainly an accelerant of it, further accelerant to further disintegration, but was not a product. And we can go through each of these steps. So this is my fundamental thesis, that over the past 80 years, the Western liberal order moved from integration to disintegration. Let's see what happened in the South. In fact, in the South, it went the other way around. We were all colonized. My brother, are you from Algeria? From Tunisia. Okay, so you were also colonized. You were colonized by the French as well, were you not? So we were all colonized. We fought in anti-colonial war. We lived in disorder. And the disorder that we lived in was favorable for our colonizers, but disorder for us. And so too in China. And we moved from disorder through unfavorable disorder when the wars were really intense, when we didn't believe that the FLN will win or Tunisia will get freedom, or whether the South African anti-apartheid struggle will win, or the freedom of the Indians will win from the British. It was unfavorable disorder. It was chaos. It was dual governance. We had to believe in the outcome of our revolutions and our struggles that we will change. But that was unfavorable disorder even for our colonizers. And then out of that came our constructions of society, an unfavorable order because we inherited the legacies of our colonial period. We had a form of order, it was still unfavorable to us because we had to deal with the legacies and we're still dealing with it. And my fundamental thesis is that the South is moving in the direction completely opposite from the global North. And this is why we don't seem to understand each other, because we are speaking two different languages based on two different reference points from where we are coming and from where they are coming. And in a sense, I come back to the theme, this concept of lost. Who lost what? And where are we in the age of loss? Yeah? So this is my fundamental thesis, and I can go a little more into detail on it. But before I do that, let me tell you about this. Again, this was by the Cascade Institute, by Homer Dixon in 2024, on the eve of the election of before President Donald Trump was elected. They came out with a paper that said, what would happen if Trump wins the election? What would be the outcomes? Now look at what they predicted. Nationalistic, xenophobic economic policy, tariffs, deportation, and their economic fallout. My God, this was before it actually happened, that there would be tariffs, deportation, and economic fallout. Authoritarianism, the US through institutional capture and the weakened rule of law. Thirdly, transactional, isolationist American foreign policy, withdrawal from leadership and participation. These were things written before it happened, predicted. And look at what they said would happen. You'll have international trade war, inflation and low growth. You will have international spread of authoritarianism. You will have multilateral exodus, decline of institutional capacities. And then it will produce an arms race. An arms race. Remember I said the 5% of GDP NATO? Well, it's going to produce an arms race, including AI. Formation of competing geopolitical blocs. The decline of multilateralism worsens all constituent crises, gray box. And look at the gray box, which will be the nth order effects, which I do believe that we are starting to live under. Prolonged global economic downturn. Great power war. 3 degrees Celsius climate lock-in. Global food crisis, global pandemics, failed state, mass violence, humanitarian disaster. So if there's one thing you can conclude from this, please go and read polycrisis.org, because whatever system they are using to make predictions does in fact seem to work. You can interrogate those systems or analysis, but they are bringing science into predicting things. And I'm in awe of these predictions that they have made. Yeah? So I would invite you to engage with polycrisis.org to understand the methodology by which they arrive at these things. But this is a more detailed chart of the disintegration. And you can go, and the reason why I put this on, you can go into each step from end of the Cold War, we had a cold peace, those dreams of a better world, reconstruction, and then you had the communist versus capitalism debate. But that was a very, very influential debate because both countries, both ideological paradigms produced social democracy or the welfare state as a means to hold societies. So welfare states in Europe grew in order to ensure that Europe doesn't go left. The United States of America also developed a form of the social welfare state in order to contain the rising left in the US. And look what happens to that. Cold War, social democracy, we had Le Trente Glorieuses, the 30 glorious years of thing. Then you had the 1970 crises, the conservative revolutions that took over the world, not only in the United States, Reagan, Thatcher, you also had it with Khomeini in Iran, you had it in Afghanistan. It was a period of the conservative revolutions. And ever since the birth of neoliberalism, market capitalism, decreased social welfare, and the reason why I put this down, that the fundamental factor driving disintegration in our societies is the erosion of the social welfare state. And that comes in the book from Tubowitz and Bourgon, a 2023 book about the disintegration of the Western liberal order, a fantastic book. Read it by Tubowitz and Bourgon. They make the point that I agree with completely, that is the erosion of the social welfare state that has produced the kind of disintegration that we have. So whenever you hear there's going to be cuts to government, there's going to be cuts here, there's going to be a cut to your health system, you've got to think about how much longer the social welfare state can take the abuse and the attack before society starts to disintegrate the way it is predicted to disintegrate. So if you are thinking that I am in any way a leftist, please believe that I am. I don't believe in the market. I don't believe that the market should be left to do what it should do. I believe that states have a responsibility towards their citizens and to protect their citizens from turmoil. And that is what social democracy is all about. I apologize, but fundamentally, I don't apologize. So where we are now, as the entropic function is greater, you will see sovereignist hegemon, steroidal nationalism, fragmented world, de-globalization, polycrises, and the return of power politics. Okay, so when we look at the South, you can see the reverse, yeah? And I then come to colonialism, subjugation, anti-colonial struggles, non-aligned movement, which is fundamentally avoidance of great power conflict, which is what Karim raised earlier on when we had the non-aligned movement of Bandung. It was a significant coming together of the global South, but it was trying to avoid we have a saying in Africa that when the elephants fight, don't be the grass that gets trampled upon. So the approach of the non-aligned movement, as historic as it was fundamentally to avoid getting trampled by the elephants. And then the independence, we started to get our own independence, South-South cooperational, regional integration, working together, IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. I know about that because I was my minister's advisor. We went to Brazil. It was based purely on solidarity. Whether we could put together a food bank, if what South Africa was growing excess maize, India, rice, Brazil was growing excess soya beans, whether we could put all of that together and ensure that countries around us do not suffer famine, do not suffer food deficits, and this could be used as a food bank as one of the bases of South-South solidarity. And then ANA. ANA is what Karim referred to, active non-alignment. Active non-alignment and the promotion of our national interest, and the national interest to say today, what is our national interest? No longer are we going to be told, you will do this because we deem it important for you. We want to be convinced what is our national interest. And you'll notice the best example of countries that promote the national interest is ASEAN at the moment. And look at what they've been able to achieve. Look at the Belt Road Initiative, why countries sign up to it, why no one is got this Chinese panic, we must, if you say China, I must like run away. No, those days are gone. They're gone. And if the West believes that countries of the South is just going to, when the West says jump, we say how high, that is gone. Now the world is at the point where we can discuss what is it in it for us, why should we do this? And sometimes that is perceived as being cheeky, sometimes that is perceived as pushing back, but it is the real world in which we live in. And there has been some real institutional muscle that has been put behind active non-alignment. So we're still in a fragmented, the South is still fragmented. We're not saying that the South is at a point where it can now stand. No, the South is still fragmented, but it is way better than it was 80 years ago. And that's the difference. And there it now has options to have debates amongst itself about how to deal with particular matters, how to deal with the New Development Bank. And again, with the New Development Bank, is a bank was also part of its formation. Because there's tremendous confusion about the de-dollarization debate. No one wants to de-dollarize. No. We want to trade in our own currencies. That is hugely different from we're going to get punished because we are not using the dollar. We want to trade in our own currencies simply because it is more sustainable for us to trade in our own currencies. And if you want us to use the dollar, then for God's sake, don't weaponize the dollar. If you weaponize the dollar, you bring us into the vulnerabilities of your financial system. We're always saying is we want to trade in our own currencies because that is good for business. And that's what we want to do. So this is where the global South is. Again, non-aligned world, Heine, Fortin, and Ominami, 2025, the great book that you referred to and I endorse. So let's come to a couple of issues. Why did the rule-based international order backfire? I mean, I'm still waiting for someone to define for me what is the rule-based international order, where did it come from, where was it legislated, what is the doctrine of the rule-based international order? Because everyone who uses this term, rule-based international order, they imply you're talking about international law. They imply. But it is vague enough where it cannot be international law. It is some rules that we don't quite understand, right? So the vagueness of the term rule-based international order, I challenge. There's one person from the Quincy Institute says, the rule-based international order refers to rules made in Washington and imposed on everybody else. That is what rule-based international order is. But I have yet to see a definition of a rules-based international order as a serious policy doctrine by anyone. And say, this is a doctrine, what we mean by rule-based international. So when you hear the term rule-based international order, you always get a sense that you have to figure out what it means. But we all know what international law is. So hypocrisy trap, double standards such as Iraq versus Ukraine or Crimea, the West Bank, and undetermined credibility and reveals selective morality. In the application of the rule-based order, it's selective morality. You tell us that it is not correct for Russia to invade Ukraine, and I agree with that. But the way to deal with that is through international law. International law must apply. We must be able to sit down and say to Russia, what is your problem? Why have you done this? And they will say to you, no, we have these issues, these agreements were violated, but that is a subject of negotiation. But then you can't say you condemn Russia for its illegal act, but you remain silent on West Bank. You remain silent when a genocide is unfolding. How must anyone trust you that the rule-based international order does not apply to the Palestinians? The rule-based international order does not apply when you bomb Lebanon, does not apply when you bomb Syria, does not apply when you bomb any other country that threatens you. You just bomb them, and then you say you're implying the rule-based international order. I can't figure that out. And I can't figure out the hypocrisy that others have about not being able to figure it out, that is nothing more than selective morality, nothing more than selective morality. And if we really want it to end, we must have serious discussions about it. We must become serious people to talk about serious issues and then find a serious path forward. Otherwise, it will remain a hypocrisy trap. Corporate culture, corporate capture, trade deals privilege investors over citizens, feeding European populism and eroding public trust in multilateralism. Again, it comes down to how capitalism has evolved and who benefited from the collapse of social democracy. Unilateralism, weaponization of SWIFT and US sanctions, accelerated BRICS local current usage, reducing the dollar reserve share from 70% to 58% over the period of 2015 to 2025. So it is true that the world is using less of the dollar. But if we want to apportion blame, why is this the case? Well, somebody made the dollar less trustworthy. And there's the book, and I hope I refer to it in the book. And if you want to, there's a fantastic book. It's called The Weaponization of the Global Economy. Weaponization of the global economy. I hope it is somewhere in there. But it's a fantastic exposure of how sanctions is weaponized, how the dollar system has been weaponized, and how the approaches, and allow me to say this, how the approaches to Huawei started a trade war that is so unnecessary, because fundamentally they were trying to choke Iran, and then they discovered that Huawei had some interactions with Iran, and then sanctions were taken on Huawei, and then things just spiraled out of control, because at the end of the day, it was about corporate interest. That was what it was about. So, the rule-based international cohesion paradox. From order to fragmentation, lessons and path forward. Collapse of universalism. So now, the rule-based international rigid top-down model prioritizes hegemony over inclusivity. So the fundamental driving engine of the rule-based international order is to have hegemony, not to include the rest of the world, creating the very fractures it sought to prevent. And that's the iron law of oligarchy. That people try to prevent or come into power in order to reverse the things that they want to reverse, but perpetuate it while they are in power. And that's the iron law of oligarchy. The need for consistency. Yes, future systems must apply rules evenly, whether in sanctions, ICC warrants, or human rights enforcement, to build legitimacy. And that is part of the virtuous cycle I referred to. That if you genuinely want legitimacy, then you must consistently apply your rules so that everybody knows the game that you play. Imagine a situation. Imagine the Blue Jays and LA Dodgers. That while the game starts, somebody starts to change the rules, right? What kind of game would you end up with? It'll be total confusion, and most of us will stay up till 3 a.m. like we did the last time, waiting for the Blue Jays to survive. But they did yesterday, didn't they? network multilateralism. This concept is a new concept that I think is going to emerge. A sustainable path forward lies in empowering regional blocs within a flexible, pluralistic global system rather than imposing hierarchy. So we need to learn and master network multilateralism through regions. So weaponization of interdependence, redefining power, systematic risk, future outlook. States must navigate a world where economies and securities are inseparable, design institutions for resilience, leverage early wins, guard against vicious dynamics, prioritize long-term governance. But fundamentally, we've got to be acutely aware that when you weaponize interdependence, well, that weaponization of interdependence also affects you, because you cannot extract yourself from the very system that we have built of interdependence. And that, unfortunately, is the situation for everybody, including the United States, that we do live in an interdependent world, and if you want to weaponize the process of interdependency, it will affect you, as it will affect everybody else. In weaponization of independence, everyone is losers. It's just a matter of how much one sector loses according to the other, and how do you buffer your loss. But in my view, I don't think it is possible. So, key features of the area of impunity, and I won't go on there, but evasion of accountability, from Russia's invasion to Israel's conduct in defiance in ICJ rulings, states deploy strategies to shield themselves from justice. Now imagine if the era of impunity or the evasion of accountability becomes a practice of every government. If it becomes a practice of every government, then we are then living in a Mad Max world, and the end of international law and the end of the rule of law. So when there are violations, those who violate must be held accountable, not because only they violated, so that the rest of humankind can learn the lesson. And when we say never again, it must mean never again for everyone, everywhere, at any time. That's what never again means. Never again is not selective, it is not locked in a particular period, and it is not locked for a particular type of people. Because we never took never again serious, we had Rwanda. And another genocide happened. And because we never took never again serious, we had Palestinian. So the time has come to say, when we say never again, we fundamentally mean never again for anybody, anywhere, for all time. That's what never again means. And I'll stay on that point. We're all awaiting the ruling of the ICJ, because the ruling of the ICJ is going to determine a commitment of the entire world on how they deal with the question of genocide. How do they deal with the violation of international law, and whether we're going to sweep that violation under the carpet, or we say, you know what, this is a moment of reflection, this is a moment of learning, this is a moment where we can start rebuilding a better world for everybody. And I hope they take that approach. Erosion of institutions. International bodies like ICC and the UN face paralysis due to a lack of enforcement power, political pressure, and underfunding. So the very institutions that were created 80 years ago are now collapsing because A, we're sanctioning them. We're sanctioning them, can you believe that? The institutions we created. If they give you rulings that you don't like, you sanction them. Then we are not funding them. But yet we're saying we want these institutions to work and to help us build a better world. It's impossible to do that without keeping these institutions resilient. Humanitarian devastation, civilians paid the price, mass displacement in Sudan. This war in Sudan is unbelievable how it continues and continues, and yet not a single Western government will pay the attention to the Sudanese people, that they pay to any other war. So the Sudanese believe that their lives are less compared to the lives, and I hate to use it, Ukraine. There is massive amount of money going into Ukraine, zero amount of money going into Sudan. Again, we perpetuate the stereotypes, we perpetuate the racial stereotypes, we perpetuate the neglect, and then think when we need the vote for Sudan, we can lobby them at the United Nations to get their vote. It's a shameful world we live in, shameful world. Legal gaps. Current framework failed to address irregular warfare, digital disinformation, and non-state actors, leaving accountability mechanisms outdated. Reinforcing or bending international justice, systemic breakdown across multiple conflicts. International law has failed to deter atrocities, signaling a systemic crisis rather than isolated types. It's a systemic crisis. And if this systemic crisis is not addressed, well, Mad Max, here we come. Precedent for future conflicts. Failure to hold perpetrators accountable set dangerous precedents, emboldening actors in current and future wars. Urgency of reform. Future justice requires updated frameworks for digital era warfare, stronger enforcement mechanism, and adequate funding in international institutions. Now, I am not a supporter of any drug lord. But if I am going to use technology to shoot down a boat that someone tells me is full of drugs, no one has seen the drugs, only I have said, I think that boat goes, is that the kind of warfare we want to live in, where someone somewhere makes a determination about something and then shoots it down without any recourse, without any justification, without saying, here's the credible evidence. We took this to the international court. The international court believes this. No, we just live on screen, and then we all are subjected to watching this Hollywood version of justice and think that we should hold this and say, wow, we respect such an approach because this is about human rights. It's not. It's not. It's not. And I'm just afraid that no one is even saying anything about it because, well, there are some presidents saying certain things about it, but we don't hear the silence, we don't hear the voice in which we say about these things. So, here we are in terms of a kind of matrix about the way forward. If you look on the y-axis, and that's capacity, right? So if you have high global capacity, and then on the horizontal side, you have agency. So high capacity, low agency. Let's see what happens. So when you have low agency and high capacity, concepts of the powerful, neo-colonial multilateralism, global south trapped in commodity dependency. So increasingly, I believe we are going to live in the world of the concept of the powerful, where the powerful are going to decide what happens because we have low global agency. We have low agency to influence that. I mean, I'm still two-minded whether the peace plan is actually an example of the concept of the powerful. But a peace plan was announced and it says, this is it, it's going to be, this is what's going to happen, and everyone going to buy into it, and everyone had to take the knee and kiss the ring and so forth. It may be. It may be. I haven't made my full determination on that yet. But when you look at these four different states of low agency, low global capacity, Then we're looking in the fragmented sphere, decoupling of interdependence, great power competition, each onto their own. You don't have agency and you don't have global capacity to contain it. Everyone, each on their own. God for all, but each for their own. If you have high global agency and low global capacity, so we have the power to act, but there's no coordination capacity, you're going to end up with competitive nationalism, resource nationalism, bloc formation, regional alliances, global institution paralysis, and dysfunctionality. So you can see how we can say, you know what, we're going to act in our interest. We have the agency to do so, and there's no global capacity to contain us. We will do what we want to do. But that would lead to resource nationalism. And of course, above that, which I'm hoping is the world in which we can live in which there is high global coordination and high agency, in which you have network multilateralism, specialized coalitions, and global commons, hybrid governance model, and sufficient consensus approaches. So we may not agree, we may not have a situation where the whole world has to agree on a particular thing, but if we have sufficient consensus where the significant forces can agree on a way forward, then we can carry others with us into that. And that is an example of either active non-alignment or network multilateralism and issue-based coalitions to take us forward. So I then come to the G20. The solidarity, equality, sustainability is the theme. As all of you will know, we were challenged by this theme. We were challenged by why must there be solidarity? Nobody wants to hear about solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And we were put under significant pressure to change this. We did not. This is still the theme, and this is the theme of the G20, and we will continue with this theme. Solidarity because we believe we need to create an inclusive future, promote the concept of shared humanity. We have a concept called Ubuntu. I am because you are. So if you just think about this, I am because you are. And that's interdependence between us. And I cannot be if you do not exist. And I cannot exist if I destroy your right to exist. So in this concept of Ubuntu is what we mean by shared humanity. Equality, fair treatment, equal opportunity for all individuals and nations. This is what we really believe in. Both at the individual level, we must have equal opportunities, and at the state level, we should have equal opportunities and treatment. Sustainability, meet the needs of the present. Yes, the present has certain needs, but do not meet this need at the expense of the future, because there will be future generations that also has to live, and they too should have the right to live in a way in which we hand over to them a better world. So these are our themes, and we didn't change our themes. The key issue is strengthen disaster resilience and responses, debt sustainability for low and middle income countries, mobilize finance for just energy transition, work together to harness critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. And you can see how each of these issues is related to the analysis that we've done earlier of the polycrisis that we live in. High deliverables, we are going to form 3 task forces. The first one being inclusive economic growth, industrialization, empowerment, and reduced inequality. 2 is the first, food security. 3rd is the AI, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. We're going to conduct 1 G20 at 20 review. That's going to be done by the University of Toronto. University of Toronto. There's a G20 group who's doing the review of the G20 over 20 years. 1 cost of capital commission. We put together a commission that is now looking at the cost of capital and the cost of borrowing, so that the cost of borrowing doesn't outweigh the benefit of the borrowing itself. Because in any $1 that you borrow, there's a cost that you have to pay back. If it's 3 cents you pay back, that's reasonable. But if you start going to 20 cents, 30 cents, 40 cents, then if you have to pay back 40 cents on every dollar you borrow, you only have 60 cents left to do anything, right? So to bring down the cost of borrowing is a very important part of sustainability of the debt crisis. One initiative on critical minerals. Significance of South Africa hosting the G20. Fundamentally, historic first for Africa. It's a historic first for Africa. South Africa becomes the first African nation state to hold the G20 summit. We think that is a symbolic and a very significant shift of power in the world. And it is, in a way, announcing the whole notion of active non-alignment. Symbols of network multilateralism positions Africa as a critical voice in shaping global governance. Geopolitical moment, hosting amid a polycrisis, debt, climate, debt, trade disruption, geopolitical rivalries. So it is a unique political moment. And lastly, we want to act as a bridge builder. South Africa positions between the global south and the G7, BRICS, and the Western blocs. So we think there's a role to play as a bridge builder. Advancing the African agenda, championing AU priorities, leveraging BRICS and G20 dual membership, and that's an increasing feature of life. There's dual membership, and how do you leverage dual membership? Economic diplomacy, promote investment in critical minerals, green energy, and innovation ecosystems. And showcasing leadership demonstrates South Africa's ability to convene and mediate diverse power blocks. Risks and challenges, and there are risks in everything we do. So these are the risks I've identified. Domestic constraint, we have energy crises, we have inequality, fiscal pressure may undercut credibility, and to that we must add the possibility of social unrest. Social unrest is a possibility in the G20. It will be deeply embarrassing for us, but it's also a reality of life that you would have social unrest whilst we're having the G20. I hope when we are planning for it, we do not use the extreme violent paradigm to deal with the matter, but we will understand the basis of the social unrest. Global fractures, G20 divisions, US-China rivalry, well, that seems, when I wrote this and today, that seemed to have lessened, so that's a good thing. Russia-Ukraine war, you will always have that issue, whether Putin is going to attend, not attend, should we arrest him if he attends, there is the Ukraine war, will we ever get a solution to that problem, the North-South divide, and of course, trade fragmentation. Expectation management, pressure to deliver tangible benefits for Africa and developing economies. There is that expectation burden on us to make sure that this happens. If it doesn't, the world is also a very critical place. South Africa would come in for some criticism if it fails to deliver. And there's the legacy question. Can South Africa turn symbolic hosting into lasting institutional gains for Africa? Role in global governance. So there are risks and there are some benefits of it. So that's my presentation. I thank you very much. And again, I want to make a couple of declarations. I'm my own thinker. I love my government. To the extent that they may believe in this, good for them, but they have never stopped me from producing ideas and discussing it with them. I take full responsibility for this. I take full responsibility for anything I have said, and I hope you enjoyed it. This is the agitations that keep me up late at night.